Hey everybody, welcome back to today's live stream. So thanks again everybody for joining us. And this week we are going to kind of continue our discussion and our conversation really about, how to design a game and, and we're going to try to do this together. And the point of what we're doing again in today's conversation and over the next few weeks or months is to try and design something together, but really it's about to show you the process. Like, how do we go from the most simple idea all the way to finishing a game concept? And so a lot of this will kind of be me, and you'll see my train of thought, and you'll see me screw up and start over and do new things and try new things. But I want all of your ideas. I want this to be a discussion. So feel free. Last week was amazing for those of you who joined us. Like, there was so much great feedback and ideas and stuff from everybody. I was very excited to have everybody with us last week. And so this week, welcome everybody back, and I hope we have even more discussion this week. So feel free. Again, this is a safe space. There's no bad ideas. And today is really about, working together in a team kind of collaborative environment to kind of show you what that's like as well, to make you see, how does a brainstorming session work? How does a design session sort of work? And I know it's harder here in text, when you guys can only give feedback there. I think I've been thinking about a way to maybe do some live streams on on Zoom or something, where maybe we can all be on video together and try something like that. As well as part of this process, because it really does help everybody to have kind of that one-on-one, at least with your voice or in video, to have a discussion that way versus just in text. So bear with us today. Again, thank you all for spending your time today. As a quick, just whatever, today is my 30th episode, and so this will be 60 hours today of content available, on the CG Spectrum design channel and from me. And it's kind of crazy to think about. There's 60 hours of content there that you can go watch for free. And so if you're new to my channel, if you're new to CG Spectrum, please go check out my stuff as a resource and check it out, because there's stuff on game design, game production, and all sorts of stuff. But I feel it's a pretty invaluable resource, and I think it's pretty crazy just thinking that I've done this for 60 hours now, and it's a lot of rambling. And for those of you that don't know, I really don't prep for this. I don't have time. My weeks are pretty busy. So at most, I might spend like 30 minutes prepping for one of these talks, but even then, not very much. So it's definitely hard for me to get up here and talk for 2 hours straight, with very little work and very little preparation. So hopefully you appreciate it. And, we're going to keep these going. And again, for the next few weeks or months, probably, we're going to be designing some games together and trying to show you the process of how we're going to go from kind of start to, I'd say, finish, being like a pitch deck or a design document. And that's kind of the process of what we're going to be doing. So quickly, before we get started here, let's do some shout outs. Cassie, Tony, Audrey, Jonathan, Akasha, welcome everybody. Again, please, today is a discussion, today is a conversation, right? It's only going to be a great discussion if you guys, throw out your ideas, and feel free to join in, right? And so, again, please do not shoot down anybody's ideas. This is brainstorming. This is about great ideas. It's okay to have discussions about why ideas might work or not work and things like that, but please refrain from ever, and this is a general comment, not just about today's talk and the channel in general, but just career advice. Like, you have to learn how to give feedback to people, and please be sensitive towards that and understand that a lot of times ideas may not be great or may not fit for this particular project, but doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad idea. It doesn't mean they're not a great game idea that could be used somewhere else, right? And so just be sensitive towards that and learn that giving feedback and learning how to give feedback as a game designer is a really critical skill. It's really something that's important to learn how to build. And in all honesty, I'm still getting better at it. I am still learning how to give feedback, because sometimes we don't have time. Sometimes it's not that we're rude or that we're anything else. We just don't have necessarily the time to explain everything to everybody, in detail. And I've definitely made a few designers cry. I've definitely made a few team members cry, accidentally, but it does happen. And so just be aware of that as we have these conversations today. I really want everybody to feel safe here and to know that ideas are great from wherever they come and however they fit, right? So let's kind of jump in, and again, today's conversation, it can go anywhere, and to kind of recap what we were talking about last week, for those of you that are new, we'll just really, really quickly start in here. I literally started with a blank document last week. The idea behind this is just to start with nothing and see how it goes. And I honestly don't know if this experiment is going to work. I hope, and I've got some feedback from last week that I think the people that participated in the discussions last week did value it. Jonathan and many of the others gave tremendous help, and so I definitely appreciated all of that. But this is kind of where we're at, and it doesn't mean that we have to keep going down this path. If people have other ideas or other thoughts, again, we're brainstorming right now, and so we may change our mind 10 more times today about kind of the direction for the kind of game we want to build, but I just want to set the parameters for why we did that. And so really quick, the requirements, we want to build something kind of AAA. We want to build, something that's ambitious, but not too ambitious, right? And I tell my students there's kind of an 80-20 rule of like, you want something familiar, but still unique and still has, a twist that has something to it. And whether it's 70-30 or whatever that final number is, but the point of that is you don't want to completely reinvent the entire wheel, right? But on the same hand, just doing another like military FPS, like, Call of Duty and just changing the story isn't enough either, right? We need to change game mechanics. We need to make this fun and original, and something and put our own little twist to it. And I think the guys, last week had some great ideas about some stuff. We'll get into that just in a second. And so we're also going to try to constrain the design problems here, and that let's try to not worry about multiplayer for now, and let's try to not really do a true open world game. I know we've kind of gone down that path a little bit with, we'll get into this in a minute, with the survival games. And we're talking about doing survival games. I would actually kind of sort of argue that a survival game is not a true open world game, in the sense that if you think about a game like Ark or any of the really big survival true survival games that are out there, the really popular ones, they have a big open world that you can go anywhere in, but they're not the same game as Far Cry. They're not the same game as Assassin's Creed or any of the other like true like open world games that we would think of, meaning like heavily scripted, story driven, those kinds of things. And so that's why, I'm using this as a loose parameter that, I don't want to necessarily build an open world RPG like The Witcher or something, even though we've talked about some RPG or open world mechanics. But, it's a very loose definition, right? And I'm just trying to only control this because the complexity of larger open world games jumps up quite a bit. And as our first design together, or as your first game design, if we jump into and do open world, we're probably in trouble. And so I don't want to overwhelm people with the complexity that a true open world game has in it, and it's both on the technology side but also on the game design side of when you have to control players and if they can go kind of anywhere at any time, it really breaks the game pretty quickly, or it can. So that's why we're trying to kind of avoid open world games. But again, it's not a hard line. There's a lot of gray area between more hub and spoke kind of stuff where there's large areas that you can play in, and then paths to another game or another area, things like that. So there's a lot of loose definitions there. Whether it's a game like Horizon Zero Dawn or something like that, can be acceptable models. And again, this is only a self-restraint I'm doing just to reduce complexity. Okay, so some of the stuff where we've been kind of heading. And again, this is, if anybody here has other ideas today, like bring them out, and we really were talking about, how to do some kind of an action RPG with kind of light RPG elements, story and combat, and just kind of a more traditional game, like that. Now that shifted a little bit in our conversation last week into a survival game idea, and we're gonna talk more about that, and then also maybe talk about just some other ways of doing it. I think that the general consensus by a lot of people that were at least talking last week was that survival games are good and bad. Survival games have some great mechanics. There's some really interesting stuff to them, and there's some unique elements there that are really good. And but some of that stuff also gets really tedious and stuff. And so I think that if we want to pursue a survival game in the true sense of that genre, like Ark or something, we need to find that unique twist. We need to find something that's different there. And we want to try to solve some of the design problems that we perceive, at least in our opinion or other fans' opinions, about why survival games are good, why they're bad, why do people play them and not play them and stuff. And so once we kind of choose a little bit more of the kind of game we're going to do, we're going to try to do a little bit of research. We're going to kind of hyper accelerate some of the processes here. And so I'll try to tell you when I'm cutting corners and doing things in a few minutes, where I might spend days and weeks and months doing that, on a bigger game, right? And so some of that is a slightly different. We're going to go through a slightly different process than I would on a full game project, because even though we may do this over a couple months, we're only going to be doing this 2 hours a week, not 40 hours a week like I would on, if I was actually professionally working on this, right? And so I don't want us to spend a year trying to design a game, right? So we are going to kind of cut some corners a little bit, in that way. And so the two components of survival games, at least last week, that people really liked were base building and kind of that survival mode of things that you have to do to survive in a world. And so those are components that we'll keep reflecting back on and trying to see, what it's like. Also, I do want to put in here, we didn't write this down last week as a note, but I think I will call this I'll call it action strategy game. And Jonathan, if you're listening in, what was the name of the game? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank today on the game that you brought up last week. There were, and I think that has some potential ideas or relevance, that we can bring back to this, for some reasons. And so I want to revisit that a little bit. So Jonathan brought up was brainstorming an idea. Yeah, I think it was Mountain Blade, where they had large scale battles. There was a bigger map. No, Jonathan, it was with the large scale battles. I think it was Mountain Blade, or the one that had like the hundreds or thousands of troops, and you could run around and do these like really large scale hack and slash. It was almost a strategy game. We referenced like Mountain Blade War Banner. So we talked about this a little bit. We looked at some videos about this last week. And I wanted to kind of bring this back up again because Jonathan had a great idea here. One of the challenges here was the technology. And so, again, I'm not limiting ideas, but I'm trying to challenge ideas that I know, at least from my experience, of why certain ideas are really hard and why certain ideas, are work really well or may not work, right? And so this isn't about necessarily saying the idea is good or bad. I wanted to make sure we captured this idea because I actually think it was a great idea, and I've tried to do some similar things in the past. But you have to recognize that when you do like a traditional action game, and so you typically have like one player character, maybe you have 3 or 4 in a co-op kind of game or team-based kind of game, and then you might have 8, 10, 12 enemies on screen, even 2 or 3 enemies. It could be as simple as I have my player character, and I might have a couple enemies, in there. And so when you scale the graphics, when you scale the game, the gameplay, the dynamics, and all that kind of stuff around that kind of game, and around that kind of gameplay, you optimize your graphics typically for that type of a project. And so the challenge from an art team standpoint and from a technology standpoint, as well as a design standpoint, is that the technology to do very, very large scale battles is totally different than something where you're doing, smaller scale combat fights, right? And so be aware of that sometimes when we make these choices as game designers, we're not choosing necessarily because it's a bad idea, but we have to sometimes challenge ourselves to say, like, can we do this and make it look good? Because you could have the same polygons, the same textures, the same complexity of a character, say if I'm fighting one-on-one versus 1 on 100 or 1 on 1,000. But, if I don't have a higher resolution character that looks better and acts better when I'm fighting him one-on-one versus, when there's 100 or 1,000 guys on screen, it's not going to look good. And so what ends up happening is you end up kind of almost building two game engines or two sets of technology with a lot more LODs, levels of detail, if you guys don't know what that is. So you have lots of different complexities of characters. So your art pipeline gets really, can be exponentially more complicated, and your rendering engine and a lot of your technologies get a lot more complicated. And so I'm explaining some of these things because I want you guys, again, as game designers, to see that even when we're brainstorming, it's hard because we want to say no idea is bad, right? But we also have to sort of have some understanding of why we're choosing certain ideas, right? And if we're not choosing those ideas because to make the game, in a way that we know could be made in the time we have and the budget we have, we can challenge ourselves. But also from a game design perspective, what's the player's experience, or how's the player, if he's going to fight, say, one-on-one with the guy, and he has just enough, and I'm saying one-on-one all the time, more like a fighting game or something, or even just one on 4, the player has a certain amount of health, the player has a certain number of skills and abilities and weapons that can deal with, say, a small scale battle. But now if I scale that up to have 100 guys that I'm fighting at the same time, how is that going to work? And so even from a game design perspective, changing, into large scale battles can be really challenging. And so that's where we just want to be careful. But let's get back to this idea. And thanks again, Jonathan, for bringing that up, because I think I do have a couple ideas for how we might utilize that. And we'll take the complexity of art and technology out of the equation, and let's just talk about it, today from just a pure, how can we make this fun? Because I do like this idea of making these large scale, kind of battles. So, hi, Lewis. Hi, Alexa. Thank you all for again joining us today. And please, again, everybody, throw in ideas, right? Today is brainstorming. So please, we're about to jump into the meat here. So get your ideas ready, and let's get going here in just 1 second. Lastly, I think the idea of science fiction seemed to resonate very strongly with everybody last week. Again, we're not locked into that, but let's talk about sci-fi in general and see if that makes sense still for the ideas that we're kind of coming up with. And then we want some sort of character-driven kind of game, third-person cameras, character with platforming or at least good movement elements, and thinking about this at a slightly bigger level. One of my things that I want to try to show you, because we're coming off of, if you have been following me, in the weeks to come, we came off about 6 weeks, I believe, of world building. And so this set of classes now that we're going to be doing is really kind of coming off of a pretty long, in-depth, discussion on world building. And so I'm trying to bring some of that world building kind of back into this discussion to show you how we do world building along with game design, and game, ideation, right? And also, again, for those of you that are new here, I don't remember what week it was. It was a few months ago, but I did do a class on ideation. And ideation, for those of you that don't know, is coming up with a new idea. And so that's kind of the phase that we're in right now, is this idea of creating a game from scratch and coming up with a new idea that sounds really easy. But as Jonathan, some of my students here can tell you, it's really hard actually, when you think like somebody hands you a blank piece of paper and says, do whatever you want to do. Like it's 10 times harder or 100 times harder than you realize. And it's funny how you just think, oh, I can do that in 5 minutes or I can do that in an hour. Like it's not going to be that hard. And I would say that, 99% of the people that that have been students of mine and that I know, struggle, and that idea can take them days, weeks, and months even to come up with and stuff. So, and even professional designers, we often just spin in circles for hours and weeks and, and stuff on just kind of coming up with something that's cool. And it's hard. It's a lot harder than you think when you actually try to put pencil to, paper, as they say. So, we did have some random ideas last week about asteroids. I don't know. We kind of spun in circles on asteroids and orbited the universe a little bit, so to speak. And I don't know if the asteroid stuff makes sense or not. So we're gonna keep that in our ideas to use later, possibly. Again, part of what I'm trying to show you here is that whenever we have ideas, I like to capture them. And so whether it's myself or in a big meeting, no idea is a bad idea. And I literally keep a notebook usually with me at all times so that I write down ideas just because I'll get them in the middle of the night, in my nightmares, who knows where I get my ideas, right? They come from all over. And so I like to just be able to keep track of my ideas because whether I use them today or whether I'd use them 10 years from now, you guys would be surprised. I mean, I literally probably have 1,000 game designs, at least in some way, shape, or form that are 5 or 10 pages of some kind of a concept for something. I have a Google Drive filled full of ideas that I've created over the last 20 years. And I've come back a significant number of times, even 5, 10 years after I've designed something. And I had somebody go like, oh, I want to design this kind of game. And I was like, aha, I already have that idea. And, go back and maybe either use it as is or rework it in some way. But I had something to kind of start with. And so I never throw any of my ideas away. So as a game designer, keep a log, I love Google these days and Google Documents because they're live. I can access them on my phone. I can access them on my computer, and so I don't even necessarily need to keep a little notebook with me anymore. I can literally just jump into I have a brainstorming doc in Google that I can just keep my ideas, and just anytime I get totally random stuff, it may not even be a full game. It may just be a mechanic. It may be something I played in a game or something cool I saw in a movie, whatever, I write it down. I keep track of it, and then I kind of sort and organize them a little bit. So I try not to be too OCD on that, but again, keep track of your ideas. So let's dive in here today. And where I want to kind of start with today, so originally when I started this process last week, again, I spent about 30 minutes thinking about it. I did not spend a lot of time thinking about it. One of the things that interested me, and again, I have not worked out whether this is a good idea or not, was this idea of superheroes. And so for me, I wanted to today start off with a little bit of ideas around superheroes. And so let's put this, I guess, here. There's no, when you organize your documents, there's no right or wrong place or way to put them, but it's just capture them now, and then you'll see that I work in bullet points. And one of the reasons I do that is because I like to be able to drag and drop and move things around and think about hierarchies of stuff. And I'm constantly reorganizing my documents, as I write them, whether it's a game design document or just a conceptual document. I'm always rearranging them. And also another quick tip is that one of the things that also can be really handy is using headers. So whether you're using Microsoft Word or using Google Documents, let me show you guys just a really quick thing here. That's another technique I'll use. And so I'll call this heading 1. I have my default headings in Google Documents set up a little bit differently. Just so, I like to have a really, really, really clear delineation of my first level headings. And so I personally like to have a black bar go across them. And so you'll see kind of why here when I do this and do that. And you'll see that as I'm scrolling through, I can really quickly see the black bars. And so whatever kind of works for you guys, can work. You just have to find kind of what kind of formatting you can do, but you can see how these black bars make it very, very easy for me to work here. But the second thing that I can do is now show document outlines. And so I'm not going to leave this on in this particular case. I mean, I guess I could scroll this out a little bit. And so you can see here that if you use the outline mode, and this works both in Word and in Google Documents. And so, let's, I'll just put something here that's maybe like, I'm doing this just as an example. So I'm going to put this at heading 2. And so, oops, that got off screen there. All right, sorry, I'm trying to make sure this all gets kind of on screen properly just for you guys. I'm going to hide this in a second, but I just wanted to show you how you can see now with my heading 2s, I put an underline under them. So again, I can very quickly see, heading 1s and heading 2s, and I'll usually change the scale of the font and make sure they're bold, as well. So just a really quick tip on organizing documents here that I hope you guys, in a practical way, can understand, some of this kind of stuff, because some of these little tiny tricks actually help you a lot, right? And so, so you'll see here that I can see a heading 1 and I can see a heading 2 all in this hierarchy here. And again, this is if you go up to your view and you can go to show document outline, right? And so this becomes a really quick way now to navigate around your document. And so that's something that, can be really, really handy for you to do when you're writing documents, right? And we'll probably try to do a whole class on this sometime just to give you guys a really cool breakdown of how I organize documents and, color code them and do all kinds of stuff. But other things you can kind of do is come in here and even do something like for example, we talked about here, so one of the things you can kind of do here is also a lot of linking and embedding. And I'm just bringing this out as one last tip here. And so if you select this thing and, if you go to insert a link, right, you can now see also that your headings show up here. So if you use your headings here, I could now say platforms, hit apply. And now, I've got a link, that's within my own document. Right. And so the idea of using headings and stuff like that, if you really understand how to use them, if you know how to make them distinct, help you both in your organization for your sidebar view and for quick navigation. But also remember that the more of these kinds of links that you can put in here, the better. Right. And so I think that's something that can be really helpful. And lastly, just one last little tip here is don't forget you can also, let's see here, insert, where is the year at? Where's the video at? I wonder if it's off my screen here. That's weird. I'm not seeing it, but I'm wondering if it's below where my bookmark bar. That's right. Well, we'll do it later. But my point is, you can set up embedded YouTube videos, things like that. So these documents that you can create can have links, whether it's to your own document, out to the websites, out to other, games, to YouTube videos, all these kinds of things. So these documents should be living. These documents, anytime you find a good reference material, write it down, put it in there, right? And stuff. So keep that in mind as you're kind of creating these documents, that these things are here to help you. And so find the process, that helps you as well, right? And so these are things that, in fact, I'm gonna put this as a heading 2 here, just to show you kind of again how I would do that. And then I can do. Again, this is oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong folder. So, and these, I can go back with. All right, so quick little breakdown of just kind of how to work, better in documents. So real quick, Connor, welcome and thanks for joining. So you watched some of it last week. Glad you're joining. You're in the 3D modeling course, and hopefully, you get a chance. I'm assuming you want to be a 3D modeler in the game industry. The more that you can, in my opinion, learn about game design and learn about how that the synergies between game design and artists, I think you can do a better job, as an artist. So please, welcome today and keep that in the back of your mind that game design and art are very closely linked. So if you do want to become a 3D modeler, in the game industry, having at least some general knowledge of game design, really does help you make, better games. And if you haven't seen my whole series, I think it was 6 parts on world building, that would be pretty relevant, for you to kind of understand how does the idea of art and design kind of mesh together, and storytelling and things like that, and how those all work together. So I'd recommend you go back and watch. It was like 2 weeks ago, basically the series ended. So it was like 6 weeks long that we talked about world building there. So please go find those and check them out, Connor, if you get a chance. Okay. So let me turn off this document outline there just to simplify it. I'm purposely keeping my screen size the best I can so that hopefully everybody can read the text okay, and stuff. For me, another last trick, that I use, which you don't see in front of me, is, I have a 43-inch monitor in front of me. So it's not a TV, but an actual 4K 43-inch monitor, as well as flanked by a 32-inch, monitor here. And so part of my setup, is to really make myself as efficient as possible. And so part of that is also being able to see usually as much text as I can, especially if I'm working in spreadsheets. But even if I'm working in these kinds of documents, I like to see a lot. I like to have a lot of information on the screen. The less scrolling I have to do up and down, the better it is. And so keep that in mind again, as a game designer, working efficiently is really, really important, right? And so I just want you to understand that is an important part of what you need to do. You need to figure out how to, you may not be able to afford a 43-inch monitor or do something that big, but it is important. In fact, I will show you guys here. Oops. For anybody that's interested and wants to see kind of how I work, and here's my home setup here for those of you that are kind of curious about how I work and how I'm productive as a game designer. Now, granted, my setup's a little bit crazier, but I have a desktop computer down here. I have a desktop computer down here. I have my 43-inch, actual monitor here, not a television, but a monitor. I have a drawing tablet here that's both a screen and a tablet. I have a 34-inch monitor here that I use for secondary, stuff. I have 3 laptops here. I use one for traveling, one for kind of more normal stuff. And this one's actually a server because the screen, the hinge broke, so I can't really travel with it. And I have some other monitors I use for video editing and, things like that. And I have lots of mics and 3 DSLR cameras and all sorts of crazy stuff. And then I have a 55-inch TV here that I use for videos or playing video games on. My Xbox is sitting here so I can play along with my lights and, things like that. But again, my point of this is to show you guys that being efficient and having lots of screen real estate, and also being able to pull up 2, 3, 4 documents side by side is really, really, really important. And so I highly recommend, if you're looking for a new setup and you're trying to get started, get a minimum of 2 27-inch monitors next to each other. And I'd highly recommend, it's worth the price. Right now you can get this 34-inch LG monitor. It's hard to see in the picture. they're about $300 right now. They're not that expensive, and if you can afford it, this also can do 2 documents side by side pretty well. So I would say get at least one 34-inch monitor or 2 27-inch monitors. So yeah, the plug-in is in my chair, Tony, so we won't go into that. That's a little bit TMI, I guess. So but the point, what I'm trying to make is, again, efficiency and how we work as game designers quite often really affects how well we work, how fast we work, and those kinds of things. And I don't want to understate the need to be efficient as a game designer. And because we're starting off right now, right? We're just beginning, and you'll want to see that, how do we work well, right? So to that point, I wanted to kind of show you. Now, this particular setup is a little less efficient because I have my video capture window here down in the corner, so you got to see my ugly face talking at you. But here's an example of kind of how, like, I would normally have like one screen here, and then in this particular case is a PDF book that I have, right? And so while I'm working, I will quite often have, 1 or 2 things, side by side like this. And so it's really important that you, again, kind of understand how do you work and how are you efficient. And I very rarely do not have 2 things side by side, as a game designer. And so just, again, think about your efficiencies. And I understand if you're a student, you're just getting started, like, money can be tight, but trying to do this on a single 27-inch or smaller monitor is really almost impossibly hard, even if you've got perfect vision. So be aware that, especially if you're a working professional or something like that, being efficient in how we work is really key. And I can't stress this enough, because I've seen so many designers that don't work efficiently, and then they wonder why, like, God, this thing takes me 10 times longer than somebody else. And it's not always that you're just struggling as a game designer or whatever. It can be, that you're just not having a really efficient setup, and not knowing how to work, right? And so I'll try to give you guys through this process some of the tips and tricks for myself about how I do that, right? But here's an example of, you've maybe heard me mention in the past, GURPS. So I bought a bunch of the digital versions of the GURPS books. I think the entire collection in paperback as well, but I do like the digital versions now because I don't have to go search through my massive library, on my wall. But you can see that, when you start scrolling and you start looking at these things with how small this is, I'm sure you guys may or may not be able to read this. I can barely read this on my screen, right? And so it's one of those things that if I'm trying to go through and I'm trying to read these things, it's really hard. And so then what happens is I might start zooming in, right? And I might try zooming in to see something really well. But now I'm constantly like scrolling, and I'm constantly like looking, and I'm constantly trying to like find things, right? So I spend all this time moving things around, and it's really inefficient, right? So that's where having some bigger screen real estate and things like that as a game designer can really be a lifesaver, and really trying to understand those things can be important to your process, right? All right. So, sorry for that little distraction there, but I'm, again, part of the process that we're going through is really about how to make you guys, great game designers, and the process that we use in coming up with ideation all the way through just working is just as important as our ideas. Because again, if we're not efficient, and we can't, when we get into the working professional environment, right? If it takes us 3 months to write a game pitch deck that we're given 3 weeks to do, like, we got a problem. We're probably gonna get fired, right? And again, sometimes that's because we have bad ideas and we just can't work. But sometimes it's just people have trouble working, for various inefficiencies they're not even aware of. Even just a slow computer. especially if you're going to work in Unity or Unreal and you're trying to build stuff. I mean, again, I understand when you're students or you don't have great computers, you can't always go buy a new one. But I've seen working in professional companies that where their employees were working on 10-year-old computers, and they wondered why everybody was running so slow. Even when I was at Disney, I mean, I went into my studio on day one, and and I was watching people work, and just to load a Unity file, just to load a level in the game would take 1 to 2 hours, on their computers because they were so slow, and then they would make a change and have to save it, and that would take 1 or 2 hours, so a single save could literally take them half a day, and so to go back and forth between Photoshop, and say Unity and trying to make a bunch of changes, they'd sometimes do 2-3 things a day. It was horrible. Like, I mean, the first thing I did at Disney was requisition about 500 new computers, and of course that melted down the executives above me, but the team was so inefficient because their computers were so slow that they literally couldn't work and do their jobs. And so, so even at big studios, that could be a problem, right? This, and at companies with a lot of money, because they're not aware. They just think a computer is a computer, right? And the same thing, all the guys, the artists were all working on 19-inch, really old monitors, like 1024 by 768 resolution. And so again, it was low res, not good color quality, and things like that. Also, my team of like 50 artists only had one drawing tablet between them that they shared. It's just stupid stuff like that. And this is Disney, right? And so, so just be aware of these things, whether you can change your current situation now or not. I'm not sure, but you have to understand again that working efficiently as a game designer is really important, right? And so think about that as we start this process, because once you get down this road and you've kind of gone too far, it's hard to change your process if we didn't talk about it now, right? Because these are like this formatting stuff are little tricks that if you didn't start that process now, it takes you 10 times longer to try to go back and reformat your stuff later, right? So just kind of be aware of those types of things. All right. Sorry for that little side trip there. I definitely like to find the rabbit holes and go way too deep down them. So, let's see here. So, I want to talk about superheroes for a bit. Again, this is a brainstorming conversation, so I want all of you to chime in here. This is not again a dictatorship. And so my first question to all of you is: do you like superheroes? Like, is superheroes in games something you like? And then the second question I want you guys to answer for me is, do you like them? And also for today's conversation, I want to talk about I want to abstract out the Marvel and DC being the big universes, right? And so for today's, in this conversation with this thing, I don't want to use those. In other words, we're not going to design a Marvel game today, right? This is not about designing a licensed IP. And so in today's conversation, I want to talk about, like, could we create a new superheroes universe? And is that a good idea? Why would we do it? And what kind of game could we do that would be interesting, right? And so for me, I look at superheroes as not only something that I enjoy and that I like a lot, and not just the Marvel DC stuff, but just in general, I enjoy superhero games. And I know there's been a number of superhero games out there. And I know that there's been some superhero RPGs out there, but I don't think there's been a lot. I would argue that there's been way more sci-fi and fantasy type superhero, RPGs sci-fi or fantasy RPGs than there's been superhero RPGs. I know that the Marvel Avengers, I think it was Marvel Avengers, is that the latest one that came out just last year? That was a pretty big failure, I guess. And I guess it was decently done, but really flopped. I think that was the what was the last? Let's see here. Do you guys remember Jonathan? What was that? What was the name of that one? Was that one? That was let's see. Is that the Marvel Avengers? I think this was it. Here, let's watch this really quick, just as some reference here. Have any of you guys? I think Jonathan, you played Marvel Avengers. Has anybody else played this game? And I'd love to hear what you guys thought about it. So, what did people think about this game? I guess this was a cinematic trailer though. Here, real quick, let's look for. I want to see gameplay. Maybe this one is. Sorry guys, I'm looking for. I want to see what the game is like. More than a bunch of stupid cutscenes. So, Jonathan, how did you find the RPG mechanic? So, as a RPG, like, how would you rate this in kind of just its mechanics and its gameplay from an RPG perspective? It's hard to tell exactly what's cutscene versus. This is still looking mostly cutscene versus gameplay. Okay, so here's a gameplay trailer. Let's look at this really quick. So the reason I'm talking about this is my idea at least is to do a superhero RPG of some kind. Now it doesn't mean that it's going to be competitive with this. I haven't played this yet, and this is on my list of things that I would like to play, but it flopped so bad I didn't want to spend the money, to be honest with it. I kind of like was one of those like, I don't know if this is worth the money or not. So I was going to sort of wait for it to come to Game Pass or the PlayStation Pass, and so that's why I kind of started to pull the trigger on this one and then ran away from it. So, and I kind of did the same thing with Cyberpunk as well. I'm sort of waiting for them to fix the bugs on that one before I jump into it. So, yeah, I'm a bad gamer. All right, so Jonathan says, actually really confusing. They had multiple ways of leveling up your superhero, but when you switched, you had to level up that certain superhero again. Huh, that's interesting. So, you're constantly starting over. So, we'll just watch this for a minute. So part of this is, again, the process. Okay, so there was some interesting gameplay. So there's some kind of platforming. It looks like they might have taken a lot of their Tomb Raider type mechanics. So Jonathan, would you say that they did they reuse a lot of like their Tomb Raider mechanics in this to kind of give it some of the platforming elements? So it's like, typical little tech trees, in here, and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, I think Cyberpunk will be playable soon. But I'm not. I'll probably play it maybe in a month, something like that. I'm just kind of probably wait for the feedback off this current patch, or wait and kind of see, if it gets a little bit more stable. I kind of wanted to play it on my Xbox One, and I haven't gotten a Series X yet, so I've heard it's really, really buggy. But maybe I'll just break down and play it on PC. But it's easier for me to live stream if I play on my console, and then I can live stream and play it. And I wanted to do a playthrough for you guys and do kind of a detailed, breakdown analysis of Cyberpunk, so it'd be a lot easier to play it on one of my consoles. But I'm still last generation on my consoles, so one of these days. All right, so superheroes. So for me, there is examples. I would love to hear if you guys have any competitive, other than so here, competition. Can't spell. And there was another one, just drawing a blank here. So by Champions Online. That's right. So this was an MMORPG. So it's not necessarily a good example of exactly what we want to build as an MMORPG, but I think that if any of you played Champions Online, and I played it a long time ago, I don't remember what year that came out. Yeah, I think it was almost 20 years ago. Yeah, and if you guys never saw Champions Online, never played it, it had some interesting some stuff. I'll show it really quick. Let's see if we can see. We'll just watch a minute of the gameplay trailer here. Because again, the point of what we're trying to do with this is when we come up with ideas, as a common design language, we want us to all sort of understand the same games. And you have to recognize that not everybody has played the same games. And so when you're in a design meeting, or even for yourself or whatever, if somebody mentions a game, you want to kind of go look at it, right? And you may want to actually go play it for a while, whether it's for an hour or a day or whatever, and stuff. And you might want some team members to play it, at some levels, just to sort of understand, like, is this a competitor or not? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a competitor, but it could be something that just is interesting. And so, like with Champions Online, I would akin this more to the gameplay as a loose analogy to like a typical MMORPG, like WoW, right? And so under the hood, if we look at the mechanics of how, if we take out the MMO aspect, meaning virtual world and the big scale of things and stuff like that, under the hood it's a little bit more, even though it's real time, the under the hood is kind of a little more turn-based. It's a little slower. It's a little bit more tactical, and things like that. So it's not necessarily as actiony. But I also liked Champions Online because you could do really, it had a great character creator, and it was an original. It was a great reference for original IP, and building your own superheroes. So does anybody out there know of any other superhero games, like any other superhero RPGs specifically? So we've got Champions Online, we've got the Avengers at both extremes, from one that came out last year on consoles to a 20-year-old or so game, on PC. So they're about as broad as you can get. And I'm kind of like more specifically thinking about games that are, it's okay if they're DC or Marvel, because those would still be, that's true. DC Online was a good one. Let's just see. Let's see. So here's a gameplay trailer for DC Online. Yeah, that was a good call. I forgot about DC Online. Yeah, the Arkham games I would put into the action category. Now, in this particular case, they're still kind of relevant, so they're not necessarily bad things to look at, right? And in the RPG category, right? That's a really broad thing. So we're not limiting ourselves to be like a pure RPG. I mean, we're not saying that we're going to do the next, the next big RPG, Cyberpunk or Witcher or something along that lines. But again, whether we're making an action RPG or whatever, it could be more like Diablo that we're making, or it could be something that's more like that Avengers game, or something else in between, right? So there's no, right now we're brainstorming, right? So even the Batman Arkham games, are good reference for, I would call, an action game that's got really amazing combat mechanics and things like that. But in those particular games, you're playing more as like a single superhero. And so, at least in my mind right now, I'm trying to come up with maybe something, at least in the back of my mind, that might be applicable to where you play a group of superheroes, or and have a chance to maybe, kind of like this, maybe you play, and control like 4 guys simultaneously. Maybe we do a 4-player co-op with it or something like that, because I like the kind of strategic tactical side and the collection side of building out multiple characters or having multiple superheroes in your party, because I think superheroes, if we think about them, in their universes, right, they're very rarely about, you have your individual superheroes, right, your Batmans, your Supermans, and whatever, but then a lot of them all exist in the same universe, and then they, so we'll add this to it here. Now, was DC Universe Online, do you guys remember, was that an MMORPG or was that just a RPG? Oh yeah, Marvel Ultimate Alliance. It's a good one. Thanks, Big Lob. Let's see here. Okay, that's what I thought it was, MMO. So again, as part of our brainstorming session, right? You can see that we're shotgunning out just very quick looks at a lot of these things. Now, if this was me, and if these things are real competitors and real things that I really felt was worth looking at, and again, it doesn't mean they have to be a direct market competitor. It could just be ideation on like a combat mechanic or an RPG mechanics or just anything else that might be relevant, right? So, I would go and maybe watch more trailers or watch gameplay walkthroughs or quite often get reviews of things that are, there and see like, what does IGN think, things like that, right? And try to understand what's the competitive landscape, right? Who's out there. And so that's both to understand competitors, but it's also there to understand, it's not just understanding the competitors, but it's understanding and getting ideas, right? And this is that 80-20 rule of just kind of knowing what's out there and knowing what genre it is, and knowing what, what exists in those genres and what, things that you need to be aware of. And if you just kind of go into this blind and kind of go, I can make whatever I want to make, and, that can be okay, but I don't recommend it. I like to be very informed about my, the landscape of games that are very similar. Now, that being said, we could also expand this beyond superheroes, right? I mean, we could just look at any RPGs that have 4-player characters on them and stuff. So the research that we could do on this could be almost endless, but you have to, as a designer, kind of figure out, where, how much time do you want to spend on your research, right? And whether we're playing the game ourselves, or whether we're just watching videos, or whether we're reading online reviews, or whatever that is, in this process, I will often spend days and probably weeks, in all honesty, for a new game idea to quite often try to understand exactly what it is, before, I start designing it. So today we're just going to spend minutes, and so I just want you to understand that, in a normal process, this would be something I would do in a much deeper way. I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit, because this is really what I wanted to see. So this is a 3D isometric, type game. It has advantages and disadvantages in doing that. So if we compare this to, say, the Marvel Alliance, the first one we looked at, Marvel Avengers game, that was a more traditional third-person game, versus this kind of a more, because this has the 4 players, the 4 characters, and it's more zoomed out. What do you guys think about cameras? What's your, in your cameras and controls interface, what's your opinion on this type of a gameplay, right? Where you're looking at, it from more of a strategic RP or RTS kind of camera, and you're looking at it from above, but that helps you see all 4 of your characters as they're running around on screen, versus like I'm in control of one character, and maybe there's 4 characters, or 3 other characters with me, but it's more of a traditional third person, a more immersive camera. What do you guys think? What do you guys like? What do you guys, do you have a strong opinion on which one, you like better than the other? Like, do you prefer a more immersive game, or do you like something that's zoomed out, and while it may not be as immersive, this is more functional sometimes when you're talking about maybe wanting to control 4 characters. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about camera and controls on a game where you're controlling up to four characters simultaneously. So, any thoughts, guys? Bueller? Just looking for... So one last thing we could look at is... So, this is again a rabbit hole. Yeah, the Blasphemer. It's hard, right? I mean, they love them or hate them, and that's why I like to find people's opinions, right? Because it needs to be, when I'm designing a game, not just about my opinion, right? I have my opinions, and it's very easy for me to skew things around what my ideas are. And sometimes it's just better to get opinions of people, whether that's your teammates, your friends, even going out and focus testing ideas or whatever, right? But you need to be careful about, where your ideas are coming from, because again, we can very often make ourselves impartial towards what kind of a game and what kind of a camera. But this is kind of an important choice in the beginning, at some levels when we're thinking about this. Not that we have to choose this minute, but I want you guys to be thinking about, like, why are we making that kind of a choice, right? And what's the advantages and disadvantages of having, controlling 4 characters versus 1, very, the isometric versus, immersive, type cameras. So we're jumping ahead here. Part of it, what I wanted to kind of show was just the, let's see if they talk about if they show the final score. So part of, again, getting other people's ideas is going and looking at reviews and stuff. And so you can have your own opinions, but I do like to go to IGN, GameSpot, and other bigger sources because they're consistent. If they do, they didn't give a final review there. I just was curious what they thought of this. Okay, so 7.8. So again, not great, not bad. And those reviews can be, for a wide variety of reasons, right? But what I'm trying to show you guys is that when you're brainstorming and you're not sure for yourself what's good or bad, like going in there and trying to create or trying to validate your ideas by looking at competitive games and trying to see what other people think about those can be a really useful tool. And last thing we can look at here is, let me go to, Wrong screen. So if you've never heard of Metacritic, this is a really great site that goes in and aggregates all of the reviews of from a million different sources, however many sources there is, and then it puts them all together in a single place. And so here we can see like Cyberpunk actually got an 85, which isn't too bad considering how buggy it was. It looks like Hitman 3 got a little bit better. But anything over 80 is pretty good. Anything over 90 is exceptional. If you get into the 70s, so, and anything under 70 kind of sucks, right? And so, let's kind of look at just some of these things really quick. So, you can see that it's kind of all over the place, on what games are getting, and whether you agree with these or not, that Metacritic is really important to understand because it aggregates so many things together. So let's put in Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and let's look at 2 on PS4. So, if we look at, that's weird. It says no score yet. That's interesting. Okay, well, that's weird. That was a PSP game. Huh. That's interesting. A lot of these didn't have scores on, but that bundle got a horrible review. Here, actually, let's look up that. Let's look up Marvel Avengers. So what I'm trying to show you guys here is, wow, that's really did get pretty bad review here. So this is a interesting correlation, and again, as game designers, part of what I'm trying to kind of show you here is that this was a very big budget, coming from a very respectable studio. From a big studio here, and it got pretty bad reviews, right? Anything under a 70 is pretty is definitely not respectable. And you really want to be a lot higher, right? And so it's important to kind of understand, like, why did they, especially when they got a Marvel IP, right? They've got one of the best IPs, one of the best game, licenses you can get, in my opinion, out there. Star Wars, Marvel, some of those are those are kind of golden gooses that are pretty hard to screw up, And so from a game design perspective, it's really, really important that you understand, like, why are games like this failing and why are games, succeeding. And so you'll see that this 67 out of 100 was based on 91, 91 different reviews, and and aggregated it there, and then it got a 5. I believe it was a 5. These are 5 out of 10 user scores with over 2,000 people there as well. And so now is this? Oh, it's a PS4 version. Okay, I saw available on Stadia here, and I was thinking this was the Stadia version, but this is just the other platforms. So again, if you've never looked at Metacritic, these are a great place. And sorry, you guys, the text is probably too small to read, but we're just going to spend a minute here. But But this is a great way to get feedback. This is a great way to understand competition. It's a great way to even from a design perspective, and try to understand like where they screw up. Was it the technology? Like in Cyberpunk, the Cyberpunk had lots and lots and lots of bugs. Now we could argue that the game design had its flaws too, but I would say that a lot of the Cyberpunk problems, or at least the perception of a lot of the problems in the reviews, were predominantly focused on its bugs and all of its issues from a kind of a technology standpoint, more so than a game design standpoint. But the game design does have its issues. Don't get me wrong. But these are great ways for you to kind of go look at a game and get other people's opinions and validate not just how you feel, because you may hate something. Like you may just be like, that was the worst game I've ever played in my life. And then you go to Metacritic and they're like giving it a 91 and you're like, what? Like, I don't get it. Like, I hated that game, and then the press and everybody else loves it. So understand that. Like, understand why you like things and they don't like things and stuff like that. And so understanding, those things, but also be careful, at least in these, about what I call the outliers, right? When you get these 90s, like why is this guy giving it a 90, when the review is, the average is a 67. And so I'll tend to kind of, doesn't mean I won't read a 90, but I'm careful about anybody that gives it, say, a 90, and as well as people that give it like a 30 or 40. Like, I want to understand, like this guy at 30, like, okay, sometimes people just have an axe to grind, things like that. So, but I do respect and typically trust like IGN and things like that. So a 60 from IGN, that's horrible. Like, I mean, that's not even beginning to be good. So trying to understand that and go reading the reviews and understanding, what did this game do good and bad and things like that, as a game designer can give you a lot of information, right? And so I'm talking about this today because it's about ideation, right? And again, we want to know, what are the things to avoid? What are the things that maybe do right? I mean, because if this game had a 92 or 95 Metacritic, we'd be like, okay, that they're onto something. Like they had a great formula here, and that was like maybe something that would be a competitor, maybe something that would be something that we should copy. But obviously, if they got a really low score, you need to understand, was it the game design? Was it the technology? Was it something else? Like, why did they miss the lightning in the bottle? Why did they not capture and make this a special thing when they had such a great IP, lots of money, everything else kind of in place, and Crystal Dynamics has, they've built Tomb Raider and some pretty darn good games. They're definitely not a junior, indie developer. So kind of understanding how they failed can sometimes help you try to understand, like, when you're designing something and you're ideating something of like, what is it within that to avoid or to do, and stuff. And so don't rule out, when you're in this brainstorming process, looking at reviews and understanding those reviews. So again, we are blowing through this kind of competitive brainstorming thing pretty quickly. And again, this would be something that I would normally spend a lot more time, doing. So let's see here. I don't want to lose the idea. So and I'll say these have great action. So part of the reason now that I brought up superheroes was that, again, we did a quick search, and I know we didn't do an exhaustive search, but within what we all know as gamers, for the dozen or so of us that are here and the 2 or 3 of you that are still awake, there's not a lot of games that are new and recent that are really have been great, right? And so I kind of identified that, at least in my mind, as my initial gut of like, well, maybe there's some opportunity there, right? And I would argue that if you looked at the success of the superhero movies, TV shows, things like that, and looking at the non-gaming side of those things, and looking at how much the Marvel Avengers movies, like I want to see like so well, almost $3 billion for Avengers Endgame, but what I was really after was I don't know if we can find this number. Let's see here. So this is the problem sometimes when you're Googling things. Trying to find the exact right information. So like, so the problem when you're okay. So that if I just typed out the whole question, I got the answer that I wanted. So 100 million people, right? Huge. I mean, that's, beyond huge. And so part of our point of reference of what we are trying to go into now is to say, oops, go down to my bottom window. Now, that also may only include movie ticket sales, right? So that may not include online streaming and all the other things, TV, and how many people saw it there. I know it's hard to track those numbers, and I don't know if anybody knows what those numbers are. And let's see. Actually, I'm going to do this. So my point of this argument of what we're trying to do is that at some levels, we need to kind of validate our target audience size. So, for example, if we were just to go do a survival game and we were going to do a sci-fi survival game like Ark, then we could go look at the sales figures of Ark. And we really would want to try to find 5 or 10 examples that are similar and then average those numbers to say like, okay, well, I think there's an audience size of 5 million people or things like that. But those are harder because that particular thing, it's a harder thing to sort of, the genre is so broad that it's really hard to pin down exactly who it is. But my point of this logic and this thinking of what we're trying to do here is to kind of prove to ourselves, and then ultimately to, we may have to prove this to some executives, some investors, or somebody like that to say like, look, this is, our idea, and our idea, has a huge audience, right? Or potentially has a huge audience, and here's why. Here's why we think this is going to be successful. So again, we got to sometimes put on our used salesman, slimy coat to go like, hey, we got to sell this thing, right? We got to understand, like, are we going down the right path? And so for instance, yeah. So if you guys can read this statement here, this is why the game flopped so badly, and I believe this is true, from what I know. And I'll read this, for those of you who can't read it, easily. So, according to reports from industry analyst David Gibson, Marvel's Avengers cost well over $100 million. Let's repeat that, $100 million. And this is in an era where, most AAA games should be like 25 million. Maybe like a big game, in my opinion, most console games is 50 million, right? 100 is like, that's huge money. Like there's not many games in the $100 million mark, right? So they only sold 3 million copies. And so they've lost 63 million, at least as of November 9th, when this was written. Yeah, somebody screwed up, right? Somebody messed up there. And so this is not something that supports our argument, right? So for making and wanting to make an RPG superheroes game, you could look at this and kind of go, well, maybe this isn't a good idea. Like Marvel Avengers had a $100 million budget, it lost its shirt, and it did a horrible job. And so maybe that's a bad genre. Maybe that's a bad idea. And that could be true. And as a game designer, we have to kind of question that. And we sometimes have to kind of prove that, right? But I also would argue that when you go to and you look at things like your scores, and we go look at, again, our Metacritic score, there's always a correlation between quality and sales. And so by us truly understanding the quality of something and understand the correlation to the sales figures, we can often, use our gut, use our instincts to try to understand, like why is that gonna, do better, right? So what I want to do now is go, and this was, what was it? Oops. So that's around, so part of what I'm trying to do here is, I'm not going to, in this particular case, I'm not going to go any deeper. So again, in a normal environment, when I'm designing a game and I'm brainstorming, I'm ideating, I want to validate that I have a good idea. And so in this particular case, what I'm trying to show you is that I have an idea for some stuff that has a few games out there. There has been kind of some flops, but you could also say, for instance, like, let's do this one last thing just really quick. So this is just a single game. So 12 million units sold with 600 million in revenue. So all right, so we're not going to go any deeper than this, but to try to kind of show you guys that there is two extremes, right? Now, Arkham City may not be exactly what we're trying to build, but it's a relevant example to show that a well done superhero game can sell really well and can generate a lot of revenue, right? And so you want to have kind of to show realistically, is this idea going to be great before you get too far into it, right? Because you want to kind of make informed decisions. So this is as deep as we're going to get into competition and audience size, for this kind of thing, just to try to understand what's out there and how well has it done. All right. So sorry if I'm boring everybody. This is that grunt work that we do in game design that's not really sexy, right? And it's not necessarily the design work of ideation, but it's the are we doing, good stuff? So let's brainstorm a little bit. I want you guys to wake up, jump back into this conversation. We've been a little light today on the brainstorming side. So for today's conversation, since we got about 30 more minutes, let's all brainstorm together. Let's work on this idea of superheroes, right? And let's try to brainstorm All right, so I want to hear your ideas for what do you think would make just a kick butt like action RPG. Let's not worry about cameras right now and things like that. Let's just talk about if you could make a superhero game that was an action RPG, and again, I will not care how actiony or how RPG-ish, and stuff. Give me some ideas. Like, what do you guys think would make a really great, like, what would be, and this could be game mechanics. This could be the types of superheroes. This could be, the universe itself. But, like, what kinds of things in a superhero game, and you could be bringing ideas from other games that were again, science fiction. And I'm kind of thinking, and I'm trying to bring this full circle really quick. So in our talk last week, we all liked science fiction. So I'm kind of edging towards a sci-fi superheroes game. So instead of placing the superheroes, in kind of today's Earth or today's time frame, like the Marvel stuff tends to be, kind of near future or a little bit like that. But they also have like the universes with different planets and different parallel universes and things like that. But so I'm kind of thinking like, okay, do we do, sci-fi superhero universe, right? So what do you guys think of that idea? Do you guys like, this idea of a sci-fi superhero universe? And we can figure out how sci-fi is. It super crazy, the world of Halo and some, like 1,000 years in the future or whatever. Let's not worry about that yet, but let's kind of assume that we're doing something science fiction, right? What do we think about that? And also to bring it kind of full circle again too, one of my thoughts or ideas again, and this comes back to Jonathan, if you're still with us and haven't dozed off. So Jonathan had this idea of Mountain Blade War Banner, and we'll just really quick watch a let me just look for a I specifically want to just find like a big battle scene here. If I can find one. Okay, not a good idea. So this is one of the older original Mountain Blade. And I don't know, I'm trying to find something that was more akin to what I was trying to do. So what I wanted to show you guys just really briefly was, okay, so these big battles, and these ideas. Now, this is very much a strategic game, right? And this, you can see they're choosing formations and things like that. So I'm not saying to go down that route, but from a action game perspective, and I wish I could remember, there was a couple older games that did this, and it's been a while, and I don't remember the names of them. But part of what I was after here to try to show was large-scale battles. So bear with me. I don't know. This is not the best example because this is still a relatively small... Okay. One last one here. Sorry guys. Bear with me here. All right, so sorry, I'm not finding the best footage at the moment. What I was trying to find was some footage of the player basically, on foot weeding through some big, massive battles. Okay, so this would be more kind of akin to what I was thinking. And the reason I'm bringing this up to reinforce Jonathan's idea, and again, I'm not saying the Mountain Blade is the perfect example here, but the experience that I like, and if you think about the camera and this perspective and going into these worlds where you're in these battles, with and against a lot of people, the thing that I'm thinking just in the top of my head is that as a superhero, we're really, really, really powerful, right? So, I mean, and this is the danger with superheroes, right? I think I mentioned, I can't remember if it was last week or in one of the, might have been, in my class, but we talked about like Superman, right? If you create Superman, I did a Superman game and it was horrible to design because Superman's basically invulnerable. He can fly anywhere. He can do anything, and it's really hard when you create superheroes that are so powerful, right? That they really, they're too strong, right? So in my mind, I want to create superheroes, but I want to create them vulnerable enough that that they're still not just gods, right? And so for me, what's more interesting is that they still have weaknesses. They still are not all powerful, And if you think about even Batman or something like that, right? That level even of superhero is really a human being who uses technology and uses those kinds of things, right, to be advanced, and of course advanced training and things. But he has no inherent actual skills that are there. But I find Batman one of the more interesting, we'll call them superheroes, right? Because they're there. Now, what I like about this concept is if you imagine this science fiction, imagine this superheroes and not medieval. So take on, the weird approach that, we've got to understand this in a very different context, right? But I like the idea that is a very powerful person, whether I'm going into this as a single individual controlling these battles, or whether I'm going into this as a team of four. However we decide to do that, I like this idea that if we could do big, massive battles, then suddenly I don't have to have. So the problem with like superheroes, like you'll have to have kind of other superheroes to fight. It's not always the best thing when Superman's just going and going boom, boom, boom. You guys just are like you normal human beings. I'll prick you with my finger and you're dead, right? And so there's no challenge. So the only people that are going to really truly fight Superman or somebody like that is going to be another superhero or another Kryptonian, or whatever. And they tried to level the playing field with Kryptonite. And of course, one of his main adversaries being Lex Luthor, who is human. But it was a weird, like Lex would never fight Superman himself, right? He arranged situations to weaken him and stuff, but it was a bit of a strange relationship. And so I don't want that kind of a situation, right? And so I'm setting some boundaries to my superheroes. But I like this idea that we could have big, massive battles. And again, if we're in a sci-fi universe, anything goes, right? So how sci-fi is it? How powerful is our normal non-superhero characters, right? And maybe our sci-fi, factions and races, they could have giant mechs. Maybe we have like a mech warrior kind of game, and maybe one faction's got kind of like superhero powerful characters, but in order to fight, in order to counter that, the other side, maybe they built giant mechs. And so now we've got like mech versus superhero, right? Like, I don't know if that's been done, or maybe, the other side built, giant genetically altered creatures like Godzilla, King Kong, something like that. So now we've got like superhero guys fighting off against Godzilla or something unique, right? I don't know yet. I'm just brainstorming, but like, I like the concept that we could do something different. That's not just superhero versus superhero. And that can still exist, right? But if that's all it is, then it changes, or it makes the universe and the dynamic of it the same as everything else. So I conceptually like this idea of these mass battles and be able to go into these fights where, I've got myself and maybe I'm fighting 100 guys or however many we can push, and we do these big, massive scale battles, that I have to go into. Excuse me. And so then, in these big battles, So, in these big battles, it might be really interesting, as a superhero, because now, like, crap, how do I fight 100 of these guys versus just another big, another superhero? Like if it's Batman versus Batman, or the equivalency of power, like that's one type of experience, but if it's me, as the equivalency of a Batman or whatever superhero we want to pick, and again, I'm eliminating the Superman, type god that are almost godlike, but like could we do these mass scale battles and make something really fun out of that as a new experience, right? And so that's where I'm taking, and we call it riffing. I'm expanding on Jonathan's original idea for this, like this Mountain Blade game, and like how it had these big battles, which I think are pretty cool. Maybe or maybe not have any of the strategy elements in there. We'll figure that out later. But conceptually, I like this idea. Maybe we do big battles and allow for that, and have superheroes fighting in these big, massive battles in this kind of a war kind of situation, right? So what do you guys think of that idea? Do you understand it? Do you like it? Does it make sense? I'd love your feedback on that idea of massive battles in a superhero universe. So Jonathan, so where you start as a newly trained superhero, you get assigned a planet and a solar system to defend from outside invaders. As a superhero, you want to feel like you can take many enemies on at once. Yep. So yes, I think we're thinking the same way. Defend a planet, a city, or anything, right? So, I mean, that could be scaled to any level, right? And it doesn't necessarily, have to be so. So is this, the entire experience, meaning like, is the entire game just that, right? Or, is it something else, right? Yeah. Cannot type. So, are there RPG mechanics, and stuff? So, is there a metagame to it? Kind of like, the Mountain Blade, had to it, whatever. But, is again, this thing, this experience, these battles, is that the whole game, or is this just a section where, let's see. So what I'm kind of doing is, again, sometimes asking myself questions, right? These are questions for me to kind of come back and ask myself, and I may not answer them right now, but as I'm thinking about things, I'm constantly just trying to kind of understand, what the universe is, right? Does the player sorry, guys, I'm typing. So part of what I'm kind of saying here is, like, if you think about the Marvel Universe again, like, it started off as each individual person kind of had their own comic series, had their own IP, And then things like the Avengers came along, and in each universe has a group now, a entity, organization of good guys and bad guys that all kind of work together. And they've proven that has been a really popular formula because it puts all these, multiple people that people like and puts them all together, creates something more interesting. But it's also a lot harder when you have, 5 or 10 superheroes, in a room. Like, that's 10x more powerful, or even more than that, in comparison to, if it's just Spider-Man in the room, right? Like, he's just Spider-Man. Like, he does have his strengths and weaknesses and all that, but when you put him with 10 other guys, that's a whole another scale of battle, right? And so trying to understand that, and whether I can take out one guy at a time, 2 guys, 4 guys, a group of guys, whatever, it changes the scope and scale of the game a lot, and you need to kind of understand that. So, let's see. So, the Blasphemer, could be fun, but not sure what enemies could occur in swarms, but still aren't just cannon fodder for your superhero. The swarm of dangerous foes that can tackle super, how would you even deal with them power level wise? Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about even some of the Avengers movies and things like that, gosh, I'm drawing a blank, right now on the exact things. If you remember, there was a lot of those ones where I remember where like Hulk and all the Avengers are like, they had all those like hundreds and thousands of like enemies that were coming from that other dimension. They had those like long kind of snake-like enemies, and they were going all through the city, and the Avengers were all over the place trying to like stop them, right? So, in that particular case, that was not, superheroes versus superheroes necessarily. That was, the superheroes fighting a bunch of basically alien invaders, right? And so I think in that particular, I think that was the original Avengers movie, if I remember right. So, sorry, I'm drawing a blank on that one today, and I should know. I've seen it a number of times. But if you know what I'm talking about, like, I mean, I think this is all about balance, right? So you could have, early on a bunch of enemies that were literally like a bunch of soldiers and humans that basically have guns, and those could be lasers or whatever, and they could, basically be cannon fodder where, and again, depending on the powers of my superhero. I mean, think about like Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man's a superhero. What would Spider-Man do against 10 guys? Probably do okay. Like if they were just 10 like normal, soldiers, right? But put him against 25, 50, 100, like, I don't know that Spidey, as much as we like to talk him up, and don't get me wrong, I love Spider-Man, but he does, I would guess, have a limit, right? He's only so fast. He only has so much web. His weapons, even though he's shooting fast with his web slings, he still can't necessarily shoot faster than 20 guys with guns, with lasers who are maybe armored, and have stuff, right? So this is just about game balance. How, in a science fiction universe, we can decide how strong or weak these things are, right? Whether these things are aliens, whether it's just part of our universe. I mean, we could be creating the equivalent of a Star Wars universe, right? Where it's just all new and unique. It's not even like Earth isn't even on the scope, right? And so imagine something like Star Wars, but now you put, a bunch of Marvel type characters in there. And so, enemies could be characters, enemies could be vehicles, could be spaceships, can be, tanks, can be all sorts of stuff, right? And a mix of those things, all to create lots of different strategies and tactics. And so I'm not too worried. It's about finding in game design this balance of like, okay, how all powerful am I? Like if I don't know, trying to think of a superhero that's got a bit more of a radial area of effect attack, so if I had an attack where I could like pound the ground and it shoots out a radius around me that basically just devastates like everything within a mile of me or whatever, right? Like, okay, I can, if I wade into an army of 500, guys and I use that one attack and it takes out everything, like, yeah, that's not fun, right? And so how do we as game designers, solve that? We take that ability away. We just don't, this is our superhero universe, right? We are in control. We're designing this thing, right? So it's up to us to set the rules. how strong, can I fight, with like larger beam attacks that are like this, and I can take out lots of guys there, and just sweep it around like and again, if I can do that and I can take out 100 guys at once, maybe that's okay for like weak fodder, but then at some point, like that same attack's going to hit a bunch of shielded guys, and those shielded guys are like, whatever, like, like that kind of tickled, and, so for us as game designers, we can balance that, right? We can solve that problem, about how strong these things are. Yeah, Blasphemer and Jonathan, I was thinking about Thor and Hulk, and I couldn't remember if they had those types of like smash the ground kind of and do lots of things or whatever. But you get my point, right? I mean, that we can create this universe, right? We can create the types of superheroes. We can figure out how to scale these things up so that as our superheroes gain more and more powers, more abilities, as we, let's assume this is a collection game. So let's say that this is, this was just junk here. Oh wait, wrong one. Let's assume that this is, where'd it go? Superheroes. Wait a second. Where'd that? Oh, sorry. I started working in the wrong area here. So actually, let's take this down. So this will give you a good example of like, I will cut that out and I will put this under superheroes because that was what it was more relevant to. So you can see that I'm always moving things around and I'm always kind of rearranging things, when I'm working here. So when we're building these these things, right? We need to figure out at some point, sometime, like how to balance it. But I'm not worried about that. I've done this enough times that you can create interesting stuff. And to that point, I'll show you really briefly. I'm skipping some steps here. And again, we're going kind of faster than, I would normally do this process. And again, for those of you that have watched previous videos or my classes, I've talked about GURPS in the past. These are by Steve Jackson Games. And if you're not familiar with GURPS, it's one of my favorite systems, not from, I would say systems is the right word. Because I played GURPS a lot, and it's kind of like D&D. I'm not looking, when I'm looking at these books right now, I am not using these for their RPG mechanics, just to be clear. Now, doesn't mean I couldn't use that at some point, but right now, these are brainstorming tools to come up with ideas. And what I like about GURPS is there's lots and lots and lots of different topics. So they actually have a whole superheroes book, right? And this is 152 pages of ideas here. They have another one called GURPS Powers. This is another 243 pages of ideas about superhero powers. Magic could be relevant. Again, magic's kind of, vague, but let's skip over magic for now. But magic and the perception of magic, or what we perceive as magic, definitely could go hand in hand, with the superpowers, right? And so like if you look at this character here, magic is not necessarily always fantastical, right? And so the perception of things that's magic does fall into what potentially might work for a superhero. Robots. Here's 130 pages about robots, and the idea of robots. And so just like we saw in a lot of the Marvel and other things, one way of combating or battling superheroes is through robots and creating super powerful robots, right? And you can even argue that like Iron Man is kind of a robot, right? There's a human inside of it. But for all intents and purposes, his battle suit, his exoskeleton is really a robot, right? And I think Tony Stark created some robots that were the fully autonomous, versions of his suit, that were basically robots as well, right? So robots is another thing, another idea, another concept that could work into our game ideas, that would be very relevant, in the brainstorming process for how and why, can we balance superhero powers with a sci-fi universe, right? And whether a robot is a humanoid size like Iron Man, and those could even be power battle suits just like Iron Man, right? So I mean, one group could be superheroes per se, another group could have power battle Iron Man type suits, another group might have traditional robots or cyborgs or other kinds of things, and then like I mentioned earlier, we could put in BattleTech and put in giant mechs that are that's also something that interests me a lot. And so I like conceptually even this idea. And I think some of the, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's been some giant like mech type battles against superheroes, in some games or some movies or some IP somewhere. So I don't know that this is a completely original idea, but personally I like the idea of combining, especially giant robots, and things with superheroes, right? And that contrast of like, yeah, you might be a superhero, and whatever, but like again, how do you deal with that, right? And there's definitely been, I think, a significant number of superhero battles against very massive entities, and I'll use the word entity of not knowing whether they were mechs, giant creatures, just things that scaled up really big, or whatever, right? We'll skip through fantasy right now. Oops. And lastly, there's another book just called GURPS High Tech, which just has a bunch of technology stuff. This may or may not be relevant right now, but we'll skip that. So the point of what I'm trying to show you guys of what I like to do is I kind of go in and I start thinking about like, what are superheroes, right? Because I mean, we've been talking and using Marvel and DC as a point of reference because those are the most common, right? And those are the things that we know that there's 100 million plus fans of superheroes out there, right? The fact that the Avengers type movies and the superhero movies, the fact that, Marvel's making about 500 movies right now and still is making like 500 movies about superheroes, the fact that there's 100 million plus people, and probably it's much larger than that. I would guess it's in the 500 million to even a billion people that have watched a superhero movie, and that would, watch it again, if it's well done. So I personally believe that this market again is untapped because there's a massive audience that's proven by the comics, by the books, the movies, TV shows, everything else about how popular it is. But gaming, in my opinion, other than a few licensed Marvel games and some licensed DC games, has really kind of fallen flat on creating a really great, compelling superhero game, in my opinion. And so that's what I think. And so we've got like just a couple more minutes. Guys, please, like we haven't had much conversation today. Just, do you guys think this is a good idea, bad idea? Like, is this something that you guys want to pursue more and get into next week about, really like, okay, how do we design a superhero, RPG? Like, is this something that you guys are wanting to see, or you guys want to talk about, a survival game or, and again, like the survival game mechanics aren't mutually exclusive here. I mean, we could, if we wanted to build in the equivalency of survival game, like maybe there's, superhero some survival elements or something like that, right? I mean, I'm not ruling that out, and we have to just understand what does it mean to be a survival game, or whatever. But, again, there's lots of ways to kind of take this, right? But, I like this idea, again, of superhero RPGs with large-scale battles, putting in the sci-fi elements, putting in the mechs and the superhero powers that are kind of fantastical, in some regards, and light RPG mechanics, great combat, collectible collection, meaning we're going to get a stable of superheroes, and maybe we control one at a time, maybe we control four, maybe it's co-op, whatever. But, I think superheroes need to be collected like that. People want to build more of the Avengers or something like that, more so than just playing only as Spider-Man through the whole game. And that creates a lot of fun, interesting, differences. We have to figure out how to do that and what we're going to do with that. But I think, if everybody likes the idea, next week we'll get through, today we got a little bit into some of that low level, like how to do some of that stuff of analysis, and working and things. We chased a few rabbits. I think next week will hopefully be a little bit more fun and interesting, and be something where we can really start diving into brainstorming, superhero powers and superheroes and things like that. So for the next week, you guys got a little bit of a homework assignment. If you're joining me again next week, please come with ideas. We've gotten some framework right now about what we're going to build, right? We've got some framework around, what we're going to try to do next week. And so, please come with some ideas, come with some, examples, think about what kind of game, if you wanted to have 1 player, 4 player, more strategy, more RPG, any of that kind of stuff, come with ideas for superheroes, bring, for your homework, come up with 1 great superhero this week, right? And bring it to us, something that's cool, unique, innovative. I mean, I know it's all kind of been done, but, think about it. But, think about, what do you like about, this concept, and, how can we make this a little different? But I think this is different enough. I think this falls into, there's enough unique elements in this idea, maybe too much. But I like both in the universe conceptually, kind of where we're going and starting to, even though we haven't done any world building as of yet, but the idea of science fiction, superheroes, giant mechs, and maybe even giant monsters and kaiju kind of stuff or whatever, and aliens and whatever, maybe multiple planets. So all that kind of stuff to me is very interesting. So hopefully you guys think the same. We're going to just kind of keep, getting into it. But again, next week, we'll try to make this a lot more of a conversation. So please, come up with some ideas and be ready to share next week. And we'll try to make next week a lot more fun. Anyways, we're out of time. Thanks everybody again, for joining in. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something. And again, appreciate your time. And, I know how valuable that is. And again, everybody this week, be safe, and be careful out there. It's definitely a bit of a crazy world. So, again, thanks everybody. Thanks Blasphemer, Jonathan, and looking forward to hopefully seeing everybody again next week. So thanks, Audrey. And everybody have a great week. And we will be streaming to you next week. So take care now.